Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual. Today, I'm joined by a special guest, Stu Davidson, host of the Construction Cashflow Podcast and an expert in managing cash flow in one of the toughest industries out there for it. Stu has got decades of experience across property, manufacturing and construction, and he's worked in various roles from estimator and project manager to development manager, and has collaborated with both the public and private sector clients. So he's got a huge amount of experience in this area. And we're going to dive into Stu's insights on managing cash flow, addressing the slow and late payment culture, and finding new solutions to age-old problems. Plus, we'll discuss how managing cash flow effectively can help reduce stress and increase wealth growth in your business. Stu, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Alexis, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's great. And I mean, you've had an incredible journey. So I'm going to start with a pretty big ask, which is, can you provide a bit of that, a kind of summary of your journey from starting in property manufacturing construction 1977? You don't look old enough for that to be the case, of course, to getting to now you're like hosting the Construction Cashflow Podcast. Like, what's been that journey and sort of driven you in that area?
Yeah, long story. 1977, I was in manufacturing. I did a traditional apprenticeship. The journeyman that I was under was in his 80s and could still wield a sledgehammer at the time, and used to get me dancing around. So it was a great apprenticeship and good grounding. So I went on from there. In the 80s, I had a steelwork business. So that was manufacturing walkways, bridges, and fire escapes, and all of that kind of thing. In those days, I remember I had a workshop and it was on a pig farm. And I remember the bank manager actually coming out to see the workshop when I wanted to get some funding. So in those days, that was quite an amazing thing. But I'm not sure that your bank manager would want to come out and see you these days, let alone come out to a pig farm and see you. So then it moved on from there, and I got various jobs in estimating departments after I closed that business, which was in the recession of the late 80s. Some people listening might remember that one. And so work dried up pretty much, so I closed that down. I went back into the industry as in a kind of a consultancy basis, and also working on North Sea gas rigs and that kind of air handling units, some mechanical, electrical. Worked in an estimating department, progressed to contracts management, went on to do a degree in quantity surveying. Mm-hmm. And worked in various different roles as an estimator contractor, and then became a chartered surveyor in about 2002. Then worked in various large consultancies, Turner and Townsend, Gardner and Theobald, those kinds of organisations that some of your listeners may have heard of if they're in the construction industry. And then went on to start my own business as a quantity surveying business in 2010, and worked pretty much as a one-man band, employing maybe a couple of graduates at a time, working in fairly traditional quantity surveying, and found that I was ending up doing all the hours under the sun. And you mentioned about growth can become stressful, or if you're ambitious can become stressful, and so I thought, what am I going to do about this? And I discovered about systemization. So I systemized the business probably around 2015, and it grew like Billy Ho, actually. It did grow, and it was quite of an unusual experience because it was a kind of an overnight event. And I found waking up one morning and twiddling my thumbs thinking, haven't got much to do today, and feeling guilty about it, And
Yeah.
so whilst I'd been quite good at systemizing, I wasn't quite sure how to handle that. So it kind of took the business into a whole new kind of realm. So most of the tasks that I did within the business, or what the tasks that I did, I started to outsource.
Mm-hmm.
And so we outsourced. Most of the outsourcing I did to a firm in India.
Yep.
And that grew and grew. We were employing graduates and training them to be quantity surveyors, they're civil engineering graduates. So I'd fly out there a couple of times a year to do some training.
Mm-hmm.
And the business grew and grew and grew until about 2019, actually. I remember the date, 29th of March 2019. We had a full order book. Everything was looking rosy. And we were just celebrating, actually, on the forecasts of the coming year with the work that we'd secured. So it was great. We were looking to double our turnover. And suddenly the bottom started to fall out, because whether it was because we were meant to come out of Europe on the 29th of March 2019, and I think if you remember, it was delayed to the October.
Yeah.
So most of that new workflow was put on hold. There was a number of projects put on hold that year. And I'd gone out getting a little bit blasé to the auctions and bought a property to develop, and and that was going to be cash flowed through the growth and development. Of course, that didn't happen.
Right.
So I ended up cash flowing it out of my own pocket, most of it, in the end of the day. So that was a big lesson. At the same time, one of my long-standing clients was entered into quite a heavy, significant adjudication with a national main contractor. Mm-hmm. They owed him about $750,000, and I'd worked with John for about 12 years, grew the business. We almost kind of worked in partnership. I mean, we worked in partnership on that property we bought and developed in 2019. But he was in a difficult position, and this really probably significant around cash flow, in that the project was behind schedule and the main contractor was demanding more and more bricklayers. Of course, he was putting more bricklayers on the project, but as you know, the more people you put on the project, the lower the productivity becomes.
Right.
And of course, with bricklayers, he was paying his brickies once a week, and he's on a 56-day payment. So it wasn't long before he's in for 250K, in for 500K, and the rest is delay and disruption and loss and expense. And what does he do? Because the contract, the standard form of contract that he'd signed up to, really didn't give him many options to stop work, down tools, or walk off site. One of the options is to, there's the 7-day notice, there's the adjudication. So he went the adjudication route, and I was with him on that. And we ended up in quite it was quite an involved, complex adjudication. So we had expert witness, barristers involved, etc. We were pretty sure that we'd get a payout, get our money back on the legal expenses, and perhaps help his cash flow as well. He'd remortgaged his property, his house, and we had kind of soundings from the adjudicator that there'd be a payout. Come the day of the adjudication, the adjudicator awarded us 0, which was an interesting decision. So anyway, the kind of we after the brushwood had kind of settled down, there was this kind of shit, that's we're wiped out. And so we sat and had a chat with the barrister, and we looked at the case law, and we felt clearly the adjudicator had made some wrong decisions there. But it's very difficult to overturn an adjudicator's decision if he's used all due diligence, according to how the courts look at natural law. It's unlikely, you can't sue the adjudicator, and it's unlikely that the courts would have the appetite to overturn an adjudicator's decision, even if you did have the money. So that was it. We were kind of we were kind of in no man's land, and my business was my work in the business was drying up. Then we had lockdown came along, and of course, because my a lot of my work was outsourced to India. The guys in the office there in Hyderabad, they kind of went their own ways back home, and kind of started to work locally a little bit more. So it was becoming a little bit untenable to take larger projects on. So I kind of come back, did some consultancy work, tried to keep the business going for as long as I possibly could. Held on to it for too long, to be honest.
Yeah.
The warning signs to early 2019. I was wedded. See, this is one of the lessons. You seem to learn more lessons when you fail or something goes wrong than when you're flying high. But in hindsight, it's a great thing. But I should have seen. I became wedded to the business. It was my baby from starting it from scratch for 12 years, and I wanted to keep it going. But really, I should have actually sold it or closed it down into early 2019 in hindsight. So there was a number of other decisions, but in the end, it had to be put into administration and closed down. That was early 2022. So that was kind of the story of where I got to there. Then it was, well, what do I do now? Do I go back to where I was? Do I want to start the same thing again, or have I got the appetite to do it again? So I played around with a few things. I tried to start a little estate agency up, but couldn't get the listings, and tried a few other bits and pieces. And one thing led to another, and this is how you can have a successful business. Things can be going well, and I ended up I'd use my resources, my savings, my investments, and actually became the properties had to be sold, obviously, to fund the legal costs. So I ended up with actually nothing, and it's a place that I thought I'd never be, and then I became homeless in 2022, and I did spend a couple of months. I've spent a couple of months on the streets, homeless, and in a way, it is a life-changing experience, and you look back and you think, well, where did I go wrong? What did go wrong? What were the milestones? What were the decisions I made? What were the external factors? Do I really want to go back there? And what am I learning? And how's my eyes being opened? And it really does. And you go from, I kind of went through all the kind of emotions you could possibly think of, and emotions that I'd never experienced before. Dark places I hadn't experienced before that I didn't understand, and there was quite a learning in that as well. And you kind of go from sheer kind of anxiety to a place of bliss, and you're not quite sure where you are. And so what do I do? How do I express what's happening to me? And one of the ways was to really share it and discuss it. And my first idea was to just do Facebook Lives and talk about what was happening. So I did that for a while, and it was more about me than who was listening, really. It was cathartic. Sure. How can I need to make myself accountable to something, because I ended up in a space where I'd finished a relationship had ended as well, which didn't help, and I found myself quite alone. And so it was I haven't got a why, and I don't seem to have a purpose anymore. And I'd done all the find my why stuff, find my purpose stuff, set yourself goals, all of that. And I suddenly realized that I haven't got that anymore. I haven't got that purpose anymore. Where'd you kind of go from there? And I think speaking into the mic was kind of helping me in a way to kind of unravel and to work out what was happening. And so there must be other people in my situation. I'm 61 and this has happened. How do I motivate myself to kind of pick myself up? What do I do next? And the voice and the speaking. And I think my first idea was, well, what about what do I do? I could do a podcast. And my first idea was a podcast, and it was going to be called Diamonds and Gold Dust for um, people that are maybe finding themselves in a situation where they have lost everything or they've gone through a major change in their life, late in life. How do you motivate yourself? How do you pick yourself up at that stage in life? And the diamonds was around. The idea was, we are diamonds when we're kids, and our stories become like gold dust, but we're still diamonds. That was the idea of it, and then I felt, well, I haven't got contacts, I haven't got a network really. Where does that go? And then I thought, well, a podcast is a great vehicle for speaking to people and finding out about people's journeys that maybe they can express, and that those stories could help others, that are listening, that may be going through a similar thing, or even pick up some little pieces of the puzzle that, maybe somebody's been struggling with, and it sometimes only takes that little puzzle piece. Maybe that bit goes there that gets them back on track, or gets them going again, so they can fix the puzzle for themselves. So it was a choice. So I thought, well, I do know a bit about construction. It's been my background, so why not start the Construction Cashflow podcast and talk to people. It's about their story, but at the same time address something which is a challenge in construction, which is around cash flow. And it affects us all. I mean, from the Carillions to the Stu Davidsons, it's kind of, you're not too big to fail, you're not too small to fail. And at the end of the day, it's how you manage your cash flow and the things that affect how you manage that cash flow. That matter, so we can perhaps look at that, and how construction is a seedbed for insolvency, and it's not just a tick box. It's there's people's lives and people's families and the kids and the missus, and what do you tell the missus if the payments are not coming in, and we can't go on that holiday, or we need to sell the house, or we need to remortgage the house, and how does that affect our communities? So cash flow in construction is, and in any industry really, is there's a culture in construction around withholding payments, creating contracts that are protecting your cash flow, making delayed payments, making payment periods longer. Robbing Peter to pay Paul, cash farming, using the supply chain as a source of funding. So there's all of these things, but I think sometimes those the guys that are pulling the shots, pulling the strings, don't see the effect it has on people's lives and their mind, their mental health, their physical health. And I could speak for hours. I know we've got a short time, but there's the in construction, there is a high suicide rate, and you can lead it back to cash flow in certain instances, so that's how I got to kind of where I am now. I'm still on that journey, and learnt some things along the way as well.
Well, and thank you for sharing that and being so sort of open and transparent and essentially vulnerable in that, because I think that's it's interesting to hear you talk about how that's actually been a useful part of your journey, has been, as you say, talking into the mic and to share that. But I think also it greatly serves other people. I think that money in general tends to be something that's a bit taboo and isn't often talked about. But particularly cash flow is one of those areas that there are numerous reasons why a business might choose not to signal to others that cash flow is an issue, right? Because even just saying, oh yeah, cash flow might be something I'm looking to improve, like that they might worry that if their suppliers, customers heard that would be a warning light to them, and as a result might change the behaviors that they got, and as a result reduce their sales, increase their costs, make their payment terms worse, and all these sorts of things. And so I think the problem is that often it can be incredibly lonely when you're having those problems in your business, and yet managing cash flow is something that all businesses have to deal with. You know, when I talk to business leaders, one of the common things, the threads, is that a general feeling that, oh, we're a bit different to everyone else, or, you know, our industry is different to other industries, or our business is different to other businesses. And yet, and sometimes that's true in certain things, you know, exactly how they do their marketing, exactly how they deliver, all these sorts of things. And yet managing your cash flow is constant, every single organization. And further than that, it's a cycle, right? We talked in the green room previously about my experience with my businesses, where I've had periods where cash is absolutely great because we've basically, you know, we systemized, we generate money, but hadn't really got other things to apply it to, which is actually as negative, right? You don't want cash just sat there doing nothing. It should be working for you. But on the flip side, I've definitely experienced the other end of the spectrum where you're investing, the opportunities are endless, but of course, often you're investing, particularly in my industry of software, you're investing for the future, right? You're investing for a valuation, for a recurring revenue that you might not have for 3 to 5 years from now or more. And yet the bills show up today. So it's I'm so glad that you're sharing that. That's why I reached out to you, Stu, is like your incredible experience in this, both in terms of you've ridden those waves. You've seen recessions and the impact on businesses. You've seen it firsthand from an industry that traditionally is one of the toughest to manage because of the big numbers you're playing with. You know, you talk about $250,000 here, like there, like for some business owners, an investment that's a lot might be £10,000-15,000. For the construction industry, an investment that's a lot quickly becomes a 7-figure number for one decision in one investment, one project. So scale is bigger, but also margins are tight, right? Like there's all this different things. So, I mean, you're the expert on this. Tell me why, what are the features of the construction industry that make cash flow challenging? Because I'm conscious that a lot of those features will apply to others as well. Like, why is it such a problem?
It's a very, very good question, Alexis, and I'm sure it's one that we could go into several podcasts on. And why is it a problem? I go back, there's a couple of things, maybe a couple of analogies. I mean, going back to initially talking about cash flow in general.
Yeah.
I like to use the analogy, cash flow is like the blood within your body, carrying oxygen and fresh blood to the parts that it needs to get to when it needs to get there, you know. And so we need to keep it healthy. And sometimes, like going to the doctor, we don't like going to the doctor, or we neglect. So when we're fit and well, we can tend to get complacent, and we tend to think everything's fine, but we don't always see what's going on underneath the hood, if you like. So it's constantly wanting to make sure that blood is flowing properly, that we're keeping ourselves fit, we're keeping our business fit, and we're keeping the cash flow going. And so in the construction industry, there's an endemic culture of robbing Peter to pay Paul, using other people's money. And it goes back to 400 years actually. So there's nothing new, despite all the kind of reports that come out every now and again about how things should change. It never really changes. We're still robbing Peter to pay Paul all the way down the supply chain, and in fact that comes from the funders, the developers, the contractors, and the subcontractors and suppliers. They're all constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul. And it goes back 400 years, actually, where the saying comes from is when St. Paul's Cathedral borrowed money from St. Peter's to pay for the maintenance and building works on St. Paul's. And that's where it comes from, robbing Peter to pay Paul. And we haven't changed, not in 400 years. And the thing is, robbing Peter to pay Paul, we're always waiting for money to come back in. There's couple of aspects, and so a contractor, it could be anywhere in the chain. So there's the project bank account, or the project finances, and then there's the business in general. The business is operational finance, and many a time the supplier or the contractor will have several jobs on the go. And so what you see a lot of is that they're managing the cash flow between them all. So you might find that I've been paid on job A and I'm working on job B, but I'm not being paid on job B yet, and I need to pay for my supplies, my resources. So I've just been paid on job A, so I'm going to use that money that's just come into the bank account to pay for my resources on job B. So that you can see that automatically complicates the management of the cash flow. So if you've got the more projects you've got on the go, if one domino falls, so you get a dispute on one project, and you've already borrowed from that one project, and now money's being withheld because there's a disputed payment, for example, the dominoes start to knock out, the dominoes start to fall over. And it's not long, before you've got an organization-wide problem, that you've got money coming out and it's not, you've got money going out or having to spend out and it's not coming in. So in the construction industry, and I suspect it could be similar in many industries, is that, it's really important that, from what I see, to manage your cash flow in terms of project by, first and foremost, keeping your operational account separate from your project account, to make sure that your cash that is coming on the one account is for that account, and it needs to stack up and you need to make it work. I think it's a bit of a cop out to borrow money from the next project, or to borrow money from a financer. You need to make that particular project work. So that goes all the way back to, am I working with the right client? Am I working with are we a good fit? Have I signed up to a contract that's not going to put my business at risk? Have I signed up to delay damages? Have I signed up to long payment terms? Am I duty bound to pay my workforce weekly, and I'm signed up to 56 days for my payment? Have I got the resource to cover that? So the whole idea of robbing Peter to pay Paul is probably one of the biggest risks. So the key thing is to keep an eye on the risks. Keep an eye on, what is my risk profile on this project. And maybe a couple of things is that it's timing. I mean, you mentioned about investing and time and investment, and that's really important. And I would always say, clients first before investment, and profit first, because if you're working on a project, know what you work out. What you mentioned, you asked the question actually there, Alexis, about margins and why margins are perceived to be very low in construction. And I think quite often when companies are working their budgets out for a project, they're looking at their operational costs, And what's it going to cost us for this project? How much we got to charge, and what profit does that give us? I would flip it on its head and say, what profit do we need? And then take out all the costs and see what you've got left for operations. And I think that's a really good discipline. This is what we've got left in our operations, and then you can see whether it's going to work or not. Or it's a good discipline to say, well, we've got to make this work. We've got to become more efficient in what we're doing, and I need to keep a cost on what we're spending out. Are our resources being directed in the way they should be? And so we've got our profit here. This is what we've got. If our operations still don't stack up, then am I really is this project really on our strategic profile, or do we just walk away from it? So I would kind of, particularly in construction are low margins, because I think they generally get, what's all the costs first, and then what profit we got left. But in terms of managing the project and trying to get away from this idea of robbing Peter to pay Paul, because I think that's what ends up where companies get their knickers in a twist, because then it starts to get into the realm of we can't visualize where the money's going. And that's where it gets, it all becomes, you mentioned about, sitting and watching the TV while everything unraveled. It's a countdown. It's because you get to a point where you can't see, there's this kind of invisible matrix where it's got so out of hand and away from the center that it all just unraveled.
Yeah, it becomes overwhelming and you can't see it. And so I love that, because essentially the core strategy there up front is one of transparency, right? It's about making and clarity, making sure that you can see as that leader what is happening in terms of cash flows for each aspect of that business. And as you say, if you've got a business with different projects, then it makes sense to have your as you say, your operational expenditure and then those individual projects, so that even if, as I can imagine, like you might have a project that you don't expect to get the money back for a year, 2 years, whatever, with a massive construction project, but as a result, like you've got to almost put the money in that you're getting, whether you're taking it as a loan or it's an investment or whatever, you've kind of got to separate that out and go, so that is for this. And it's not being like, the picture isn't being blurred by having a load of other transactions and all stuff that's going in there that's then difficult to see. And it's interesting, when we talk about that clarity and transparency, I've seen people talk about creating special purpose vehicles, literal separate company structures to create legal and financial protection between projects and and so on, so that if one project falls over, it doesn't wipe you out and everything else. And of course, that has a great value, and that's a good advice. Although I appreciate in a lot of cases that it might not be possible based on what terms you're getting for the investment that you're getting and so on. But what I love is that you're highlighting is that even if you're not doing it to create protection and all these sorts of things, just doing it in the bank accounts, in the accounts, having that broken out so that you have got that clarity and that you can see the difference and what decisions you're making on that, I think it's really powerful. Speak to me about how to take that further, because one of the challenges that I see for some businesses is particularly where you've got, I think the industries that struggle with cash flow the most are the ones where you're paying up front for delayed gratification. And of course, in many cases, that's how you get your biggest return, right? Like in the property is known for being a big way in which it creates millionaires, because you're doing a big investment that's relatively high risk, that you're playing big, but there can be big outcomes. And in my industry, software can be similar, right? It's a big investment up front, get it at the end. Whereas in the world of my previous industry and businesses that I've had, like in consulting, for example, you've got very low outgoings And although you might have some lag time of customers paying and certainly a sales cycle and so on, like you can run it tighter. So but how do we deal with it in the project? So if we separate out the project, so we've now got clarity on the fit, but then of course there are investments that you have to make up front for money that you might not get until a long time in the future. How can a business that's struggling with that make that easier to manage, less stressful to manage, and make sure that they don't end up in a catastrophic situation?
Well, brilliant question. Very good question. And it's, so if I take let's take a development, for example, a property development. It's really setting out where your cash flow risks are going to be. Right. And quite often with the construction, we might want to procure a particular project in a certain way, but we've always got to communicate with, if we are funding or we're investing or we're using funding for investment, for we're going to put into a project and we're going to reap the benefits of that at a later date. Now, it's always good to understand clearly that investor's risk profile, because quite often what I see particularly in the development construction project is that they're not fully aligned. And so the investor's risk profile might not be the same profile as the developers or the contractors or the supply chains, and never the twain to meet, and then they end up in problems halfway through the project. So the investor may be providing stage payments, for example, and the contractors drawing down, the developers drawing down on a monthly basis. But depending on what's happening on site, how they procured it, they'll because obviously an investor may have people that are investing in them, so they're looking after investors' money, if you like. So they'll be constantly reviewing their risk profile in terms of what they're going to allow to be drawn down. So I think the first key thing is to be in alignment. So even before you enter into, you mentioned special purpose vehicles, and part of that, you may have some equitable funders, you may have some debt finance in there. So it's all really everybody getting around the table and understanding where their risks are. And then even before you start, if it's a construction project or any type of investment really, is understanding where the parties are coming from. Are you a good fit? Are you a good fit now? Are you going to be a good fit at the end? What are people's exit strategies? Because some people will want to exit at different stages. So understanding that, because that can cause a problem at one point or other. And then you can put your contingency in. Where's going to be our biggest risk in this? And it may be that we want to negotiate some mezzanine finance or some backup finance, because at the end of the day, if you're talking about investing now for something later, you're going to get your return later. You've got to, your pot of gold's at the end of the rainbow, if you like. So you've got to get there first. And quite often, where you'll see a project fall down is just before it gets across the finish line. The finish line's in sight, we've done everything, things that, and then we've just run out of cash, we've just got 2 months to go. What do we do? Well, if you want an investor at that point, he's going to want pretty much all your profit to help you out, so these are the things. If you can identify where's our problem going to be, we need to get across the finish line. What happens if we run into a dispute, a delay? There may be delay, disruption, there may be an unforeseen that crops up, and we need that extra injection. We've got £5 million profit in this, but we're going to go bankrupt if we're a month before we get across the finishing line if we haven't got the cash flow to get us there. So it may be, so for example, the building that you was creating a building or a business out of that, and that's where your money was going to come in. So your block of flats, for example, and your money was going to be in the selling of those flats or renting those flats out. So you've really got nothing to, you've got to get that product completed. and if you don't get it completed, then you're not going to get your return. So
yeah, people don't buy half a house or
half a house,
and live
exactly.
in half a room.
Yeah, exactly. So it's identifying where your risks are going to be along the way. So first and foremost, communication. Who we in our end business with, who we're getting into partnership with, what's their exit strategies, and how we're going to then procure the project. Does it align with their strategy, their policy, their risk profile? Does it align with their other shareholders? So really just sitting down and understand the who, why, what, where, and when of and also how do we behave along the way, when this, we draw up our memorandum of agreement, and how are we going to behave with each other on each of the points as we go through, so we kind of got that sorted out. And then it's really, how do we procure the project? So if it's construction, I know I'm coming back to construction a lot, but
That's good.
Some investors will only sponsor a certain type of contract or contractual terms. Some may, so there's different, to not want to get too technical, but we might be procuring on a target cost contract, or a design and build contract, or a traditional contract, or a JCT, or an NEC, or all of these things, or and we will only invest if you do it this way. But it might not be the optimum way of procuring the particular project. So you've got to kind of marry up the ideas of the risk. But one of the things we do in construction, which is quite amazing, particularly in traditional construction, we channel most of our money through a main contractor, if you look at it from a traditional sense. And so we're asking a main contractor. So the money that passes through a main contract or a developer, the money that passes through a main contractor's account, 80% of that is other people's money that we're asking him to be guardian of. So we've all sat round as the gurus planning the project. We're looking for the site. We found the site. It stacks up. It works. It gives us a return on. Then we go out to tender, and then we ask a contractor unofficially, because we don't really fully understand what we're asking him to do, but we're asking him to be the guy. So we've got all these financial people that have set all these kind of mechanisms up for funding the project, and then by default, the contractor's handling 80% of other people's money, but he's a builder, So, is he the best person to put all of that? We're putting our eggs in that basket, and so a contractor, he's going to manage the works. He's coordinating the works. He's not a cash flow expert, although he's aware of cash flow. He's a business owner,
and yet is holding
holding
that vault, and and also I suppose is almost given a sort of assumed level of competence and ability and so on in that area. And as you say, that isn't necessarily their strong suit, and you often don't have much visibility. Oh God, it's incredible. I could ask you so many questions about all aspects of this, but we're going to run very short in time. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. There's so many places I could go with this. We could talk more about top tips. We could talk about strategies that have been more innovative, etc. I know that a lot of the guidance and the lessons can be learned from your podcast, the Construction Cashflow Podcast, which I highly recommend that people check out. Any other resources or links that you'd suggest that people check out to kind of learn more from you?
Yeah, they look out for the Construction Cashflow community, which is going to be a live chat really that relates to all the podcast episodes. So that'll be coming out in June. Fantastic. And there's the website as well. If they go into Construction Cashflow Podcast, if they type that into Google, they can find a bit more information on the website, which is being developed. So, but the community is going to be quite exciting, because the guys that are on the podcast will have the opportunity to go on there and answer people's questions around the topics and the discussions, things that have been discussed on the podcast episodes, so it's going to be, hopefully it will build over time into a little bit of a kind of a listener's digest, shall we say.
Yeah. And a community, right? Like,
a community,
I think as we've discussed, like it's a very personal thing. It causes a lot of stress and anxiety for people, and for good reason. The impacts can be huge. And so, I'm so glad you're doing it, Stu. And I really appreciate you sharing the lessons today. Like, it feels like we've, one of the things I loved is how strategically you've talked about cash flow, in terms of how do you set it up from the beginning so that you've got the visibility? How do you make sure that you've got a good understanding of investor profiles and how that's going to work? How you've looked ahead and looked at your cash flow risks and managed that? How you've made sure that you've got the right people and the right roles to manage that? I think that's awesome, because anyone that's been listening to some of our recent episodes, we're kind of doing a series on cash flow as part of we've produced a book, an ebook on how to improve cash flow, essentially using processes. And a lot of that is about how do you make sure that you've got the processes in the business to keep on top of this stuff as you go along, right? Like, everything from 13-week cash flow forecast right down to chasing payments and so on. Like, a lot of that we've talked previously about systemizing the business so that it can scale and grow as you experienced earlier in your career, and cash flows as much part of that. So I love the fact that that's been a focus, and it's been really interesting to kind of go more strategic with your focus. So thank you so much for sharing that, Stu. It's been absolutely fantastic. I highly recommend that people check out the Construction Cashflow Podcast. We'll make sure that there's a link to Stu's new website and the community in the show notes. We'll also include a link to Stu's profile on LinkedIn, so that people can check that out. The cash flow ebook I mentioned, people can find at airmanual.link/cashflow/ebook. And so I hope people will join for that. I'm even tempted, Stu, if you're available, to get you along to an Ask Me Anything session that I'm running on cash flow, which we'll see whether we can make the dates work. But
yeah, absolutely.
airmanual.link/cashflow/webinar. But Stu, thank you so much. It's been incredible. You've provided so much value in such a short period of time. I really, really appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Alexis. Really happy to be on. Thank you so much.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. And for everyone listening, like, if you found today's episode useful and insightful, inspiring, and I'm sure you have, you could just subscribe to make sure that you hear more great insights from people on these sorts of topics. But Stu and I would really love it if you'd also let us know if you got value. Share it on social media, tag us in, let us know your favorite key takeaway or whatever feels right for you. We would really, really appreciate it, wouldn't we, Stu?
We absolutely would. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. Well, Stu, thank you again so much for joining me. Everyone else, until next time, have fun.